Good afternoon, everyone. My name is John Taves, and I'm the event coordinator here at McNally Robinson Booksellers. We are gathered here this afternoon to celebrate the Winnipeg launch of Finding Otipemisiwak, The People Who Own Themselves by Andrea Currie, published by Arsenal Pulp Press. We were also gathered here on the eve of the 4th National Day for Truth and Reconciliation to honor the life and work of treasured elder and tireless community builder, Theodore Niizhotay Fontaine with Niizhotay Stories, an annual event which calls on all of us to forge a healing path in the spirit of two hearts, all in collaboration with our great friends at Plume, formerly the Winnipeg International Writers Festival, as part of Thin Air 2024. Before we officially begin the event, it gives me enormous pleasure to call up Ted's partner in all things life, love, and beyond, Morgan Fontaine, to offer Theodore Fontaine's beautiful land acknowledgement. Please give her a very warm welcome.
Thank you, John, and thank you very much to the Writers Festival, to Charlene and McNally Robinson for the continued support of the work that my husband did. This is his orange t-shirt that I wanted to bring because, well, I carry something of his everywhere with me. And this one is particularly important because of the message on it about honoring residential school survivors and the memory of those who did not survive. So it's the way in which I approach Orange Shirt Day is a day of remembrance and a day of honoring those lives. This land acknowledgement was written by Theodore for the book titled Did You See Us?, which is his memoir and the memoir of all the other survivors that were able to contribute to this story of the Assiniboia Residential School that was here in Winnipeg. And with regard to land acknowledgement, I'll just say that Theodore's approach to land acknowledgement was that each one ought to be something that an organization or an individual writes for themselves. What does it mean to you, and how do you honor that land? So this is his acknowledgement. We acknowledge that we are on First Nations land, Turtle Island, inhabited by First Nations from time immemorial. For thousands of years, First Nations people, the Anishinaabe, Cree, Dakota, Dene, and Anishinaabe nations walked and lived on this land and knew it to be the center of their lives and spirituality. The Anishinaabe call this land Manitou Bay, the place where the Creator resides. We acknowledge this became the homeland of the national homeland of the Red River Métis people. We acknowledge and welcome the many people from countries all over the world who have come to join us, Turtle Island's First Nations, in calling this land our home. We acknowledge that we are now all bound together by Treaty 1. Chimikwech.
Thank you so very much, Morgan. I'll now go over what we have in store for you this afternoon. There will be a reading from Andrea Currie from this podium before we move along to a conversation hosted by Katherena Vermette in these elegantly regal chairs to my left. After that, there'll be an opportunity for you folks to ask questions as well. So if you are one of those gathered here today and you do have a question, please just put up your hand and I will wander over to you with this microphone in a non-threatening manner to ensure that your question can be heard live on the video feed. And if you are one of those people watching on YouTube and you do have a question, please feel free to write it into the chat and we will put it to Andrea as time permits. At the close of the event, Charlene Deal, the director of Plume, will offer some closing comments and let you know how to get books signed. As a special preview, it will take place here. I'm now delighted to offer a few words of introduction for our guests this afternoon. Your host, Katherena Vermette, is our chief Red River Métis writer from Treaty 1 territory, Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada. Her first book, North End Love Songs, published by the Muses Company, won the Governor General's Literary Award for Poetry. Her novel, The Break, by House Benancy, The Strangers, and The Circle, published by Hamish Hamilton, were all national bestsellers and won multiple literary awards. Her most recent novel, Real Ones, also Hamish Hamilton, was recently longlisted for the Giller Prize and has not left our bestseller list since its publication. It's also really good. Her work for children and young adults includes the picture book, The Girl and the Wolf, from Theodore, and the graphic novel series, A Girl Called Echo, published by Highwater. She holds a Master of Fine Arts from the University of British Columbia and an honorary Doctor of Letters from the University of Manitoba. Katherena lives with her kids, Fur and Human, in a cranky old house within skipping distance of the temperamental Red River. Our special guest this evening, Andrea Currie, was born into a Métis family with a strong lineage of warriors, land protectors, writers, artists, and musicians, all of which was lost to her when she was adopted as an infant into a white family with no connection to her people. It was 1960 and the Sixties Scoop was in full swing. Together with her younger adopted brother, also Métis, she struggled through her childhood, never feeling like she belonged in the world. When the adoptions fell apart during their teen years, the two siblings found themselves on different paths, but they stayed connected. In Finding Otipemisiwak, Currie takes us through her journey from the harrowing time of bone-deep disconnection to the years of searching and self-discovery into the joys and sorrows of reuniting with her birth family. Andrea Currie is a writer, healer, and activist born here in Winnipeg and currently living in Cape Breton, Nova Scotia. She is a psychotherapist working in Indigenous mental health and has accompanied the Wakagama residential school survivors on their healing journey for the past 20 years. Please give a very warm welcome to Andrea Currie.
Thank you so much, John. Wow, that sounds like I want to live up to it. I think I'll just dive into some reading. I'm going to start with an excerpt from a piece that appears early in the book about the day that my younger brother arrived in our family, and I'm choosing it because it kind of provides the context for a lot of what I write about in the rest of the book. It's called Rob's First Arrival. Whenever I am asked about my earliest memory, I see myself standing beside my adoptive mother in front of the picture window in our house on Oakdean Boulevard, looking out. My older brother was standing there with us, neither of us old enough to be in school yet. I was glued to my spot, watching with intense anticipation, that feeling still so vivid, for the 1960s station wagon, a big boat of a car with wood paneling on the sides, driven by the social worker who was bringing my little brother Rob to live with us. It was the spring of 1964. I was 3 years old and Rob was 2. I was the second child our parents adopted. He was the third and last. I adored him. We had already met, of course, on previous visits, but this was the big day. The little boy we called Robbie back then was coming to stay. Robbie's favorite toy to play with when he came for visits was a rocking horse made by our adoptive dad. As soon as I saw the station wagon pull into our driveway, I turned and ran down to the family room in the basement. Standing 2 feet off the ground, with rockers about 2.5 feet long, the solid wooden rocking horse was almost as big as I was and definitely heavier. Still, with determination and strength fueled by adrenaline, like a mother whose child is pinned under a car, I hauled and pulled and bumped the rocking horse up the stairs, bringing it to the living room so it would be there when Robbie walked in the front door. I got about halfway up the flight of stairs before I just couldn't go any farther. I didn't have the strength to get it all the way up to the main floor, and I knew I couldn't let it go. I was stuck. I hollered to my mom to come and help me. She did. Overruling my plan and my protests, she took the rocking horse back downstairs and left it there. and we returned to the living room to welcome Rob. There was something about that moment that distills the 48 years of my relationship with Rob before he crossed over to spirit at the age of 50. That scene has a holographic quality. Every element, every dimension of our relationship contained within it. The way his vulnerability reached into the deepest places in me, the way we understood each other, the unbreakable bond that sustained us through years of abuse and made us lifelong allies, the way I reached beyond reason to do whatever I could for him, my powerlessness. We were two Métis Sixties Scoop adoptees. Our older brother, also adopted, was of European descent. For reasons I don't even want to get my head around, there was a disparity in our childhoods. Our older brother's was not punctuated by abuse. It was Robbie and I who were not pleasing to our parents. We were still quite young when we acknowledged this shared experience. It was like that song on Sesame Street about how one of these things is not like the others, except with us, there were two that didn't belong. Try as we might, and we both did, we tried hard. We didn't fit in. I remember feeling anguish before I knew what it was. The feeling of not being the daughter my mother wanted, at a loss as what I could do about it. And Rob, well, it was years later in therapy when I realized that my witnessing our mother's emotional and psychological cruelty toward him, as well as both parents physically assaulting him, is the source of severe trauma I'm still trying to heal from. My deepest grief wears his name. Recently, I heard Jenny Hyan Wills read an excerpt from her award-winning memoir, Older Sister Not Necessarily Related, in which she shares the story of her reunion with the South Korean family she lost touch with when she was transnationally adopted. In the interview after her reading, Wills spoke about the dominant narratives of adoption and how they don't reflect the range of experiences of adoptees. Narratives like, it didn't matter to our parents who we were or where we came from because they just wanted to help. Or this one, adoption is a blessing for those of us lucky enough to be chosen. Wills talked about how it actually isn't like that for a lot of adoptees. How some of us felt like props in the lives that our white middle-class adoptive parents were determined to construct. Hearing that was like being hit by a Mack truck. Rob and I were the props that didn't behave properly. Here comes the guilt. How can I write about our adoptions this way when our parents were basically good people who wanted to have children but were unable to conceive? People who were loving in some ways. What about the good things we did together as a family? Don't those count for something? And here's where I make the shift from feeling guilty, which I believe is a useless emotion, a contraction that makes a person feel small. It's not helpful at all in making change. To asking myself, what is my responsibility here? My answer, I am responsible for being fair to our adoptive parents in my portrayal of them. In this instance, I take fairness to mean that I contextualize their attitudes and behavior in the values of the settled colonial culture that shaped them. It means that I acknowledge their humanity and the possibility of past trauma in their lives that might help explain, though not excuse, their violence. It means that I consider how the beliefs about parenting that they inherited and that were reinforced by their social and religious communities influenced the choices they made as parents. All children need safety, affirmation of their basic goodness, and unconditional love. All children need to be seen and appreciated for their uniqueness and to feel like they belong among their kin and as part of a lineage that goes back generations before they were born. My parents' inability to provide this emotional sustenance to Rob and me is partly on them, partly on the parenting practices of their generation, and partly on the child welfare system. Janine Carrière, scholar and professor in the School of Social Work at the University of Victoria, states in her study on the importance of cultural planning when Indigenous children are being adopted that connection to one's family and community is needed for healthy identity development in general, as well as for racial identity development. Raven Sinclair, a scholar and social work professor at the University of Regina, recommends that when a non-Indigenous family adopts an Indigenous child, the entire family should shift its identity to become bicultural, seeking relationships with the Indigenous community their adopted child comes from, and learning teachings from that nation that will enrich all members of that adopted family. Carriere states that cultural plans in the adoptions of Indigenous children, and I quote, help to end the mass emotional and psychological trauma children are experiencing when they are not connected to their culture. This much needed development in responding to the needs of Indigenous adoptees did not come soon enough for Rob and me. Our parents expected us to assimilate easily into their world, and when we did not, the problems that ensued were not interpreted with any sociocultural awareness, but were seen by them to be due to personal deficiencies in us that it was their job to correct, usually with harsh discipline. The fact that this was not entirely their fault does not change the harm that was done to us at their hands. I wonder now how much I understood that this would be the case back then on that day of Rob's arrival, my earliest memory. At 3, had I already been hit and hurt by our adoptive parents? Was I already scared of them? Probably. I remember witnessing our parents being extremely violent with Rob during his preschool years. How much of my own experience was woven into my overwhelming need to help him feel safe and know that he belonged, know that someone had really seen him enough to want his favorite toy to be the first thing he saw when he walked through our door on the day he came to stay. We heard the sound of 2 car doors closing, one after the other, and then the doorbell rang. The social worker came in, Robbie's small hand clasped tightly in hers. He was wearing shorts with a little polo shirt tucked in at the waistband and special shoes that didn't look very comfortable. There was a baffled look on his face, a sweetness I would come to cherish, and just the hint of a tentative smile.
Get adjusted.
Getting adjusted. Sounds like a good idea.
Getting all cozy, getting strapped in.
How far can you go with that?
You can go anywhere with that, it's a microphone. And we're good. How you doing?
Okay.
Yeah, we're here. Your lunch.
Yes.
At long last, book number 1, debut. Yeah. How's it feel?
It feels lovely, and I'm just so overjoyed to see so many family and friends here. I feel like I'm held in this web of love. It's great. Thanks everybody for coming.
Thank you. I like the webcam won't be able to see this maybe, but there's like a sea of green, or green, orange through it. Orange going through, orange to match with your beautiful book. Now this is a first book, but it doesn't read like a first book. It reads like you've been doing this forever, which you have. There's a practice, or a traditional kind of, but also a very casual practice of literature where your first book introduces yourself to the world. So how in this book do you introduce yourself?
I feel like I'm introducing myself as a storyteller, and I think most of the people who know me would know that I usually have a few stories to tell. Yeah, but I also feel like I hope that I am introducing or just continuing on the path that I really feel Creator has put me on as a healer. And so much of what I've done in the last, 40 years has been about healing, whether that's healing in our organizations and communities around issues where we're trying to make transformational change, or healing with individuals and communities. So I think that's part of it. I think the other thing about introducing myself as a storyteller is that I am introducing myself as the granddaughter of Marie-Thérèse Goulet-Courchaine, who is a well-known, went by the pen name Niizhotay. I'm introducing myself as part of a lineage of storytellers. Her father, Roger Goulet, was also a wonderful writer and archivist and historian. And yeah, I'm skipping around because that's kind of how my brain works. And I think it's partly how our Indigenous storytelling works, right? It's not linear. It kind of circles around different things, comes back around for another go at that idea. And I think being a healer these days also means being a warrior and a protector, because we need to be, there's so much we need to protect, and there's a lot we need to fight for. And I think when we talk about resilience, and I have some, I won't get into all my soapbox about that, but I have some thoughts about that.
You're literally
But-
on box, just
But,
so.
oh, okay, how handy. I know one of my soapbox. But, yeah, I think for us as Indigenous peoples to heal involves standing up for ourselves. It involves speaking out. And people have varying degrees of capacity for that or comfort with that. So for those of us that are okay with it, I feel like it's a responsibility, and I'm ready and I want to step up.
I love that. That's beautiful. I love that you're framing in forms of storytelling, because one of my big questions I kept coming back when reading this beautiful book is that circle. And is that constant idea of returning to different forms, because you have poetry in here, you have memoir, and also memoir very similar to what you read, which has essay in there. There's some fancy prose, you're kind of going over here. It's a very different kind of book than just a straight up chronological memoir. You infuse these memories. So similar to your passage, you're not just a 3-year-old girl meeting her brother and welcoming her brother in with that love and care. You're also looking at it from your vantage point now and infusing all the knowledge into that scene. So it is incredibly circular, it's incredibly hybrid. Why did you choose to approach with so many different pieces, like poetry in here and memoir in here?
So I think initially it just kind of came out in different pieces. I also think that it's a part of our Métis culture to not want to obey the rules of conventional storytelling, or the what makes a story, or how a story should be put together. I think we have a kind of what's the word? Dislike for being governed. So yeah, I think it's partly blood memory going, coming out there. This is going to come out the way it comes out, and I'm not going to worry if it doesn't fit into those forms. I'm just going to weave it together somehow. Like in some ways, I feel like the book is like a sash. There's strands that are about the rivers. There's strands that are about my brother and about myself and about issues that we're all grappling with around Indigenous identity. And but I also, to get back to where you started with the question, Kate, I didn't want to just write a memoir. I didn't want to just write my story for a couple of reasons. One is that I've connected with this amazing family and community, and that is not what happens for a lot of 60s Scoop survivors. So if I were to just write that story and put that out there, it would be very misleading for people who don't understand and don't know that, just like with residential school survivors, many 60 Scoop survivors did not make it and will not be able to tell their stories. So I wouldn't have been responsible for me to just tell mine. And I just wasn't really interested in doing that. I was interested in bringing my brother Rob's story to people and to speaking about what happened with him, because his story has been distorted in my family history, and a lot of the truth of his experience has been erased. And I really wanted to honor him. And I wanted to tell the truth about what happened to Rob. So that was really important. And I feel like he was with me all the way through. Like he's like, "Yep, we're gonna do this together." And the other thing is that I think for those of us that have had our senses of ourselves messed up, shattered, taken apart, it does come back together in like puzzle pieces. So it is a piece here and a piece there, and somehow they make a story.
Yeah. Okay. This is when I always go like, okay, I've got 5 questions. I'm gonna pick one and hopefully it's the right one. You do so many brilliant things in here, very exciting things with the puzzle pieces. But I wanted to center Rob for just one more moment, because Rob is the true MVP of this book. He
would love being called
MVP. Captain of the team. He shines, and I think he was with you. You do show that in every page all the way through, and as he walks with you, as he continues to walk with you. And this is me attempting in my best Sheila Rogers voice. Tell us about Rob. Okay, I didn't do that, but.
No, that actually was pretty good. I think
Thank you.
is that you over there, Sheila? As far as I know, she lives in Ontario, but I think she just kind of
brought her through.
Rob was a really lovely kid. As he got older, he was this big burly guy that had a very sweet, gentle soul, and lots of mischief, loved to have fun, loved to tease. But he also had a real deep subterranean river of melancholy and sadness. And I think he and I both had that, and had a rough time. And for Rob, to me, I keep saying this in these conversations I'm having about the book. It comes back to the importance of kids being seen. I could go into this whole thing about emotional attunement and Daniel Goleman's work on this and how babies need to know when you're looking at a baby and they're trying to communicate and they're not verbal, and you give them some kind of message back that you received their communication. They get so excited, their little arms and legs go like that's an emotional building block. To be seen, to know that you expressed something and it landed. And that's what a lot of us kids didn't get. We weren't recognized for who we were. So in a sense, Rob and I were that for each other. We saw each other. And we were also witnesses to what happened to each other. Because I think that it almost falls into gaslighting kind of thing, right? When kids grow up with a certain kind of treatment that becomes normal, and when it doesn't feel right, and you think something's not right with this, but everything around you is saying, "Oh yeah, this is cool, this is normal, this what happens when you eat, it's what happens everywhere." And I think I was in grade 8 before I found out that not every child got it. It was so normal. But I think with Rob and I, you have this feeling that this doesn't feel right to you, that feel right to you, doesn't feel right to me. We guarded each other's perceptions, and that's a protective thing, right? When you don't believe your own perceptions, then you're really in trouble. But we guarded that for each other. It was like, yep, that really happened. I saw that. So that, he was the closest person on the planet to me. And when he was given back to Children's Aid, removed from our family, that was really devastating. And I think it contributed to becoming unbearable for me to stay there. And I left as soon as I could after that. And then lost touch with him for a while, and then when he came back into my life, that was just like the best.
And you continued, you protected each other, you continued to protect. And what, not giving away any spoilers, but there is a goodness and healing, I think, in your relationship and the way you bonded and continued to protect him till the very end. It's beautiful.
Tried to.
Yeah. I think you succeeded. So I love what you say about siblings and how you see protecting each other's perception, validating one another, you know, that reflexive piece. We're so blessed with siblings. I think in my own life how, my brother goes through therapy only because I go through therapy and then I tell him about it. Which leads me to my point, I'm always curious about your other work, which is working specifically with residential school survivors on the East Coast, but also the therapeutic practice that you came to, which I think itself is its own unusual story from your trajectory from where you came from and through into healing to then become a healer. How does that knowledge, because I think it inform your work, because what I hear in this is all this incredible wealth of knowing that you're able to look back on your life and see it with such clarity. Does that come from that, or?
I think it comes from a bunch of places, and I would say that, first of all, I'd say it's not that unusual for people working in the mental health profession or the healing profession to be survivors of some forms of trauma. Like I actually did a reading in Cape Breton last week, and this fella came up to me afterwards saying, I just started writing about my childhood trauma. I've been a psychiatrist all my life, working with people with trauma, and I just started exploring my own. And I actually had run into him earlier on in my life, and because he was working with someone I was supporting. And actually, I looked at him and we just said, yeah, the wounded healers, right? Like it's partly why we're drawn to the work. But also when we've had experiences, whether on our own or with the help of some really skillful people, to be able to heal and transform some of that. One of the trauma teachers I love talks about when we can transform some of our own pain in our own healing process, and bring it out to issues in the world we want to help transform, or other kinds of healing. It's like we can become a remedy, and I love that. I want to become a remedy. But so there's that. But I think the other thing is that I arrived after about 7 to 9 years doing mainstream mental health work in a Mi'kmaq community. And I knew right away that I had to put aside, a lot of that approach and just be open and respectful of the fact that I was coming into a community that had survived. I mean, on the East Coast, they have the longest history since contact and devastating loss. And if they had, if my Mi'kmaq relatives have managed to stay as healthy and intact as they have, they've got to have some great healing practices and approaches going on there that I need to learn about. And so I did. And they were very generous in sharing that knowledge with me. So I believe I had a message this morning that my beloved elder, Albert Marshall, might be tuned in. And if he is, go ahead, Albert, Madawale. I'm so glad if you're listening. But Albert has been an incredible teacher to me, and his late wife, Regina Marshall, who were the ones that developed the concept of two-eyed seeing. And I think now we sometimes say more than two eyes. It's about all the different wisdoms, the different knowledges of different peoples that we can weave together and enrich what it is that we're bringing when we're doing anything, any kind of work, whether it's healing and mental health, or whether it's education or working on the land and relating to the land, whatever. So I would hope that what weaves into my work is that wisdom as much as the other kind of training I've had around kinds of things that can help people heal. But I do see it all of a piece. Like I really feel like, and I felt this for decades in my life, that my work is always about healing. The jobs change, but the work is the same.
I love that answer. I also love the circle way you answered it. It's great. It's the whole story. I have to be conscious of time. Okay, I'm totally conscious of time. We are gonna open it up to questions. We're gonna be nice and open and flourishing with questions. So if you have something, just let it brew. We're totally, and as Andrea, as you can see, is a totally unintimidating person to ask questions of. And I also know significantly there's a lot of family here. Okay, I got one more question, then we're going in. That was only just a warm up. We got some eager people here. You talk about folks with such love. And what I really appreciated in this book was the way it is so very much memoir. It is so nonfiction coming from your own life. But you handle all your persons in it with such care. Because what memoirs are populated by characters. We are showing not everything to the world, but what you choose to of yourself, but also of other people. So in that, I always envision this push-pull between privacy and openness. And it feels so very respectful that there's a lot of privacy here, but we don't notice what you're not telling us because you're so generous with everything else. How did you navigate that in this story?
I gave it a lot of thought. You know, I think, and what I learned, because this was my first time writing something like this, with the intention to share it, that what I can write about is the truth of my experience. And other people can have been at exactly the same event or moment in my life, and they will have the truth of their experience of it as well. And so it's not like there's only one version of something that happened. There's how it affected me or how I experienced it. So I'm very grounded in that. And I'm well aware that people might have other takes on some of the things that I talk about and some of the stories I tell, and I welcome that. I think we need all the stories. But I also felt like I wrote this with a very specific purpose or for a very specific reason. I wanted to make a contribution to the conversation about the Sixties Scoop and the impact of the Sixties Scoop that I think needs to happen. And the details around my family and who the people are in these stories is not necessary in that conversation. The kinds of things that happened, the impact it had on me and on my brother, I think that's helpful to put into the conversation. So wherever possible, I did not include people's names. You know, it was obviously impossible to tell some of these stories without people knowing that my adoptive mother was involved and she's still with us on the planet. And so I, in that case, took great care to try to be as respectful as I could be and to show her in her humanity. I had no hesitation mentioning my Uncle Derry because he's my hero. Uncle Derry,
here?
stand up.
Yay!
Stand up. Uncle, you are ally extraordinaire. And because I owe so much to you, so that was not a name that I had any hesitation sharing. And for the rest, I really wanted to protect people's privacy. Yeah, everybody needs to choose ourselves. I certainly had to when we're ready to tell our own story. So I tried to balance all that.
You did a very respectful job, a very caring job. There's so much love that comes through here. And I love that. I love framing books in that way of contribution to the conversation, because that's what I look at as our literatures, our Michif literatures, our wider Indigenous literatures, and wider. We're talking, we're having a circle, we're having a gap. We're having this long conversation that lasts decades, if not generations, and upon generation, where we're all building the story together. And this is a brilliant contribution to the conversation. I know you wanted to do a final reading. Yeah, are you ready for that?
I am. I wanted to bring it back to the land because, you know, the land is holding us today. We're on the traditional land of the Métis people right here today, as well as other Indigenous peoples of this region. And because our ancestors are the land, like they are literally carrying us every step. And so yeah, I wanted to bring it back to the land. And this is a piece called The Land I Belong To. 1. 13,000 years ago, my homeland was a lake left behind. Glaciers melted and receded, filling the bowl of the land I come from, holding the promise of peoples to come, holding more water than all the lakes in the world today combined. 8,000 years ago, Hudson's Bay ice melted, making mud. Lake Agassiz drained quietly away into the Arctic Ocean, a climate event associated by scholars with the biblical story of the Great Flood. 1,000 feet deep, this continental bathtub emptied into the Great Mississippi and, knowing no borders, flowed all the way down into the Gulf of Mexico. I was born on land that once was water, daughter in constant search for a shore. I played and swam in the relic of the Lac Vieux, the ancient lake, known now as Lake Winnipeg. Grown now, I live in a place where dusk is defined by an amphibious sun slipping down behind a distant watery line. 2. Agassiz left in its wake 3 remnant lakes, nestled in a vast plain, endless fields of wind-blown grasses, groves of birch, poplar, alder, pasquahuasca, threaded by rivers, veins of the land, and great marshy lungs, Masquigua, refreshing prairie air. This fertile land, once a lake bottom, a great river's womb, gave birth to me. 3. My Soto grandmothers paddled these rivers, moved with the wind, Otin, across the plains, sharing space with wild creatures, honoring the sacred, harvesting in harmony with the land's rhythms of abundance. My grandfathers from France, given new boots and a long boat ride, sucked in the air and were sucked in by lives of a land for the taking. Rash decisions and brash dreams of the lives they would be making. Upon arrival, scorned life in colonial towns, scanning the western horizon for other possible futures. Finding a way through winding rivers, they wound up on the prairies, foundlings at the mercy of the wary natives, and discovered something familiar, tapishkuch, a wildness in one another's eyes, an inkling from which they fashioned kinship. They wed one another in the limitless space where the ghost of a memory of a lake still blows across the land.
Those breaths, poems, and throughout the book, especially the rivers, it does really ground you, not only our land, but also the beautiful water we're blessed to come from. John is behind somewhere, right? He's gonna appear.
Okay, so Andrea, looking back on all the times that you were abused by your foster parents, have you ever and during all the times that you were fighting with them, I guess, have you ever heard them say, "Oh, I wish I never adopted you," and have they ever said the same thing to Rob as well? And another question would be, a related question I should say, is have you or Rob ever overheard your foster parent, your adopted parent, I should say, telling family, friends, and other relatives how life would be different if you weren't in the house? And this is in the years where you were with them.
Sure, I can respond to that. I'll answer the second question first. I never heard my parents talking to other people about how life would be better for them if we weren't with them. But I did hear at times from my adoptive mother, especially after she had been really angry and violent with me, she would say, you know, if I had to do it over again, I would still adopt you. But the feeling was that I was to be constantly grateful, that that I was lucky, that it could be otherwise. And in fact, with my younger brother, it turned out to be that, you know, they unadopted him, even though there's no legal way to do that. We found a way to do that.
Andrea, listening to you read your work and talk about your work, I'm struck by your deep humility. And I am wondering if this is something that has always been with you from childhood, or if this is something that you developed over time, if someplace there was rage in between. Do you know what I mean?
I think there's a serious and important place for rage. Definitely, and I have my rage, and I maybe like a lot of people, I find it easier to feel rage when I think about what happened to my brother. That's been way harder for me to make my peace with than what happened to me. About the humility, I feel like when I found Indigenous community, and I found, you know, I grew up in a very staunch Catholic family, and of course, I became aware of a lot of hypocrisy. There were some things about the Catholic faith that were that remained kind of important to me, but I definitely rejected the whole structure and the patriarchy and the hypocrisy of people, you know. I mean, our parents were very involved in the church, and meanwhile, these things were happening at home. So, you know, there's a big disconnect between the professed beliefs and values and the way things were actually rolling out at home. But I really think for me, humility came to really be important to me as part of the 7 sacred teachings. And for me, the 7 sacred teachings of love, respect, humility, courage, truth, honesty, wisdom they're like an ethical framework. They're like, this is how we're taught, this is a way to live a good life. And I also have noticed that of all the people I'm drawn to that are leaders, even some of the greatest leaders, if you think of Mahatma Gandhi or Martin Luther King, or, you know, help me think of a woman quick. But humility is always a part of a great leader. And so that always struck me, you know. There's always that sense of there's more to learn. I'm just doing the best I know at, you know, with what I have, the best I know how so far. It's all a work in progress. So yeah, I feel very grounded in that, and grateful for the people who taught me about it.
Hi, Andrea.
I thought that it was really insightful hearing you say that, different people might have different vantage points and different opinions as to how certain situations impacted them. And I was wondering how much of their experiences of what you know do you take with you?
That's such a good question. I think that when I have the opportunity, and one doesn't always have the opportunity, but when I have the opportunity to hear what other people's experiences of a similar or of the same moment or part of the story that's being told, then I think we can have a collective storytelling, right? I think telling our stories collectively is really, really powerful, or a dialogue. So I really value those ways of telling stories too. And then I think there's also something where, certainly for my younger brother, for instance, and now increasingly with my older brother, who is still alive and lives in Vancouver and is very supportive of this book, even though his experience in our family growing up was quite different. We are putting our different versions of what our family history was together, and we are figuring out some things that we wouldn't know if we weren't sharing those stories with each other. That something comes out of the alchemy of that that's bigger than either of our stories, that sheds light on both of them. So yeah, I really value that.
Thank you so much for such a beautifully generous reading and conversation, but also I think beautifully paced. It feels very like a gorgeous exhale this moment. I think I heard, Andrea, if I may, in the margins of something you said just now, that this was the first time you wrote about this subject with the intention of it being read. And so I wonder if you'd be so kind, and you can say no, to share with us some of the kinds of writings maybe you had been fiddling with that were not intended, or if you don't like that question, plan B could be if you could reflect with us maybe on whom your intended audience may have been for this book, and if it's not necessarily specific writing for the self or community, how you gesture to your community. Okay, thanks.
Thanks for the question. I think I wrote a lot it was part of my survival. It was part of, when I didn't necessarily have anybody to talk to, because we were really strongly, it was really encouraged, not just encouraged, we were just straight out told not to talk to people about what was happening. So writing journal entries and recording things that, especially when my mother said I was going to end up being just like her, I wanted to write things down to remember. It's like, these are things I'm not going to do. In case that happens, I need a notebook. And I actually had that for a while, but it was, it's sort of like that quote I found in one of my early journals that is at the beginning of the book of, if no one has written what I need to read, I'll have to write it myself. Like, I think I wrote so that I would have something to read that made sense to me. And it only needed to be for me for a while. So yeah, and then I tend to just take a lot of notes. I take a lot of notes when I'm reading. I may or may not, like I loved school, total nerd. So when I read nonfiction or fiction, I have a notebook, like I have bunches of them. And I have like the author and the quote and the page, and I can go back and find, I remember that thing and it fits with this thing I'm writing and I can go find it. But so I do that kind of writing just for myself, and I like to record. I like to document, and I think that comes from my family. I think about Roger. I think about it was like, this is all part of our history. I come from a family who knew that our experiences were part of history, and so I have that. I think that's a blood memory thing for me. In terms of this book, I really wanted, I had been helping residential school survivors, not helping, that's not the right word, supporting residential school survivors in telling their stories for many years before I started telling mine. And it was some of them who started encouraging me to tell mine. And so then I became, I understood stories as medicine. This is a big teaching in our Indigenous communities, that stories are medicine. And in terms of healing relationships, Albert Marshall, one of his things that, if you're listening, Albert, one of the teachings of yours that I remember very well is that relationships are based on the exchange of stories. So that started to become more, okay, maybe there's going to be some sharing of these stories. But this particular book, I really, my most heartfelt hoped for audience is other 60 Scoop survivors. I really want people to feel less alone. I want us to be able to gather and hear each other's stories, feel like it's okay to tell them. And beyond that, anybody that wants to read it that might want to get a better look or a better understanding of what some of the impacts, just the way some of us are really listening to our residential school survivors to try to really, it goes beyond just a history book, like a felt experience of what it was like. And I think we need more of that in this country we now call Canada if we're going to move beyond where we've been.
Was that you said stories are how we make relationships, or relationships based on stories?
Relationships being based on the exchange of stories.
Thank you. I totally butchered that. I love that. I love that.
Thank you, Albert.
Thank you, Albert. Keep that.
I think I read about your book that you worked really hard to be perfect and fit in. I taught you 50 years ago. One thing that you have in common, you have perfect hair then. And you have perfect hair now. It makes me very sad that the secrets are so isolating, and I wish I had known. And I'm so glad you made this journey.
Thank you so much, Jane.
As a dear friend of yours from high school, it also makes me very sad. I knew there was stuff going on. We went through a lot together, and it makes me very sad that I didn't know enough to help you. So I just want to apologize and say I love you.
I love you too.
So we are just approaching the end of our time. We do have one more question, but sorry, did you have something you wanted to say?
No.
So we do have one question before I'll turn things over to you both for final comments, and then we'll invite Charlene back to that. Jane was wondering, Andrea, can you talk about blood memory as it might relate to those 60 Scoop survivors who will never know their origins?
Right. There's a whole section in my book about this, and because it was something that I went looking to learn more about. And it started to pop up, I was in a webinar during COVID about water, and Casey Adams was teaching, Winnipeg artist Casey Adams. It was, the webinar was about learning about our relationship with Nibi, with water. But we were to start with finding clay from the land where we were on, and there's a beach in West Mabu in Cape Breton where you can find clay, so I went and found some clay. But the way she was getting us to work with the clay in this online class was to close our eyes, she said, and just feel it and let your blood memory come through. So the idea that it's in our bodies, excuse me, I'm gonna have to put this lozenge in underneath that. And I had had a few experiences in my life that were like, where'd that come from? Just kind of seemed random that all of a sudden I was doing something that nobody around me knew how to do or had taught me how to do. So I'm sorry about this. But I heard two parts of the question. I heard a little bit about what blood memory is and how it works. And the idea is, and Indigenous people have had this belief and understanding about blood memory for generations. And as in many things, Western science is kind of catching up with knowledge that's kind of parallel around genetic memory. So in the Western world, I won't go too much into that end of it, but you know, for instance, virtuosos, prodigies, children who know how to play a Mozart, you know, piece of music without any, like that there's something genetic that can be passed down, which is pretty exciting because I honestly feel like our brains, the cognitive rational part of ourselves, that's the most colonized, right? Like that's where all that shit really lives. Pardon my language. And it's the hardest to unearth. It's the hardest in some ways. It's so deep. But our bodies carry some of this knowledge and intelligence. And we can bypass some of that critical, you know, the cognitive piece, and sometimes just feel into something true with our bodies. So, yeah, our bodies carry, and the teachings I've had from my elders, Barb Cameron from Long Plain First Nation, you know, when we know how to do something that we've never done before, that comes from somewhere. That we have that's the knowledge of our ancestors, and it's in us. And that is so hopeful. And then the second part of this person's question was, you know, how does this relate? What could the meaning of this be for people who are finding it hard to reconnect with teachers, with family? This is something we really have to grapple with. Certainly out east, in Newfoundland, you know, the Beothuk were almost completely eradicated. Even now, there are people who may sense or have some vague knowledge of having of being Indigenous, but have no community to connect with. So these are tricky questions, and I say this in very much aware of the context we're in right now about Indigenous identity fraud and the whole phenomenon of pretendians. And that's something we have to be really heads up about, because at the same time as I want to be compassionate and supportive of the Indigenous folks that need some way to connect and are finding it hard to find community and ways to connect, and teachers and guides, as I have been so blessed to find. At the same time, colonial extractivism is alive and well, and it's still happening. And you know, my feeling about some of the clear cases of Indigenous identity fraud are that, like, that's the colonial imperative rolling along. Like, what else can we take from you? We can take your identities. You know, we can claim to have the same rights and the same. So I'm not going to give, this is a very complex issue, and we need lots of conversation about this one too, and all the related issues. But to go back to what I think, I almost felt a little bit of yearning in that question that came over I think from the live stream. I still think it's important to find community. I think if something in us is saying, there's something about me that is there that I want to honor, that I want to listen to, I really don't think our bodies lie. So I would encourage people to kind of try to honor that. But I really do believe, and this is where Megan Sinclair's statement when he said, it's not who you claim, it's who claims you. I think the community piece is really important. And if you can't find your own community of your own ancestry, which is sometimes impossible for people, you can still probably find a community like I did. You know, I couldn't come back here when I found my people because I wanted my son to have a relationship with his father. And I found a Mi'kmaq community that, you know, I was able to become a participant in and was welcomed into, and then received so much guidance and teachings from. So I still think finding community is essential. I hope that answers this person's question. It's kind of all over the place, but so is this issue, right? We need a lot more conversation.
I agree, and it's a beautiful answer, and a little bit of a circle, you know, just I'm not gonna lie, we're doing that. But also too, these things all come from the same muscle, which is, you know, trying to destroy what is present and what is strong. So thank you for bringing that in. Thank you for this whole conversation.
Sorry it went overtime. I'm not known for short. Conciseness is not my strong suit, as anybody who knows me would be able to tell you.
Well, we also started late, which we're also known for as Mitchell. Thank you so much, Marcy.
I don't even know kind of where to start. That was a very fast hour and so rich and evocative and maybe a little bit provocative. I'm just extremely grateful to you, Andrea, for this extraordinary window into your thoughtful life and your willingness to share and your trust of sharing your stories. And to you, Kate, for an extraordinary conversation. My head is kind of rushing, and I'm just gonna try to pull a couple of tiny things together. I was thinking earlier on about that saying that hurt people hurt people. And as I listen to you and think, I would quite happily just have you come home with me and you could just talk to me all the time, because does anybody else feel like it feels so calm and so compassionate, so kind? Like, I don't know you, but I actually do want to take you home. So what I was thinking is, hurt people may hurt people, but I think healing people can heal people. So I am so grateful for you to bring that kind of sensitivity and sort of empathic connection and share it with us. I'm so glad that your family is here and friends from forever. And when this book was pitched quite a long time ago, and Sonara at Arsenal Pulp said, Andrew would like to be able to launch this book in Winnipeg. And I was like, oh, so tell me about it. She's like, well, like she grew up here, and it's like the Sixties Scoop story. And I'm thinking, I don't believe that we have enough opportunities to hear this particular story, and how wonderful for us who are the community here to be able to be here present for you to share your stories with us. I think with the community that you have claimed and who has claimed you, but all the rest of us who are around the periphery of that community are enriched by your courage and your clarity and your kindness, your generosity. So I'm very pleased that you were able to come and that we could include you in this festival, because, and also in this particular series. Niizhotay Stories, you know, comes out of a very deep love and affection for Theodore Niizhotay Fontaine, who was also a storyteller, but a story sharer, I guess. I always felt like I was invited into a bigger understanding of his life, and by extension, my life. And I do feel like, as a way to celebrate and mark, I guess, the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation, the truth has to come first. And all of us are just at the start of that. I think about you as a little kid not being allowed to tell any of your stories, and how extraordinary healing it is for all of us to move these stories into a shared space. So enormous thank you to Andrea and to Kate, please.
I do need to jump in because there's someone I want to give a moment of well-deserved recognition to, and that is the incredible artist whose work appears on this cover, Tracy Charette Fair, my Michif sister, who's becoming my dear friend. We are definitely kindred spirits, as we are discovering more each time we hang out. But this is from Tracy. Tracy, please stand up.
Wow.
Tracy's work is all about celebrating us as Métis people and revitalizing cultural practices and doing it collectively in ways that are healing. And this is a section of a larger fabric piece, textile piece called Northwest. And to me, it was the lakes and the rivers and the land of my homeland. And I'm so blessed to have it on the cover, and I really encourage you to check out Tracy's work, and there's opportunities to participate in all kinds of collective art making that Tracy is doing. So Tracy, you are just a gift in the community and a huge gift on my book.
That's beautiful. Many kinds of storytelling all come together, right? Beautiful art is another way of framing the world and framing our experience. We are almost at the end of Thin Air 2024. I'm a little bit sad about that, but also I'm ready for sleep. We wind things up on Tuesday evening at the Rachel Brown Theatre with 3 poets, Angeline Schellenberg, Sue Sorensen, and Steve Locke. And that after a little break, we followed by the haiku death match. So if any of you are interested in singing like haiku to the death, I highly recommend that you join us then. I do want to acknowledge this extraordinary place that we're gathering today, and the Wizard of Oz who lives behind this van. John Taves is possibly the most accomplished event organizer in the country. So a big shout out to him and to this amazing place. Also, he's kind of a modest guy, so he'll hide back there till his blush is gone. We are very delighted to be having an ongoing partnership with McNally, which actually began when the festival began in 1997. So we are a long ways in, and it just is stronger and richer as we go. And I want to just flag a couple of off-season events that we're doing together coming up. The very wonderful Amanda Peters is going to be here in the middle of October, toward the end of October, October 27th, hosted by David Robertson, who's one of our local stars. And on November 8th, we're collectively hosting John Elizabeth Stincy with a new short story collection. If you don't already get McNally's newsletter, you should definitely sign up for that. But hey, while you're at it, why don't you sign up for the Plume Winnipeg newsletter too? Because we've got lots of mischief going on. We'd be delighted to have you show up at all sorts of things. But now it is time to race forward and buy copies of Andrea's book, because I think every person in here now needs to read it, right? So the only real rule here is that you can't leave the store until you pay for the book. I know they do it like that here. So will you join me one more time in thanking these 2 amazing people for this?